So a sense then of anticipation ahead of that judgment to be delivered by the Western Cape Division of the High Court. Let's give you a sense of where we're going then over the coming hours into tomorrow morning. Joined in a moment by political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe, but also joined by our SABC News Anchor Oliver Dickson, who is live for us from Cape Town, where much of the action will be coming from. Oliver, that's the intersection, isn't it, between at least there's two arms of government. The one being Parliament, I see behind you, with a responsibility of what they have to do in terms of the constitutional scheme, but the other just down the road being the Western Cape Division of the High Court that also has its work cut out for it.
Yeah, no, certainly, Tulas. In fact, the night shift staff here at the parliamentary precinct had just come in. You'll know that they're busy reconstructing the National Assembly chamber. And so it's quite busy out here. One might think that, politicians are roaming around caucusing last minute, because you know that they have to submit tomorrow to the chairperson of the portfolio committee, the ad hoc committee, which is the impeachment committee, Ghana Magashule. They have to submit to the portfolio committee their final considerations in terms of the terms of references that they were unable to yesterday find consensus on. Of course, that judgment also happening at the same time at 10 a.m. in the Western Cape High Court. And we're anticipating that to be quite the affair. A little bit later on here on The Full View, I'll be in conversation with the first respondent in the President's interim interdict application, Violet Zungula of the ATM. Of course, their responding affidavit and their arguments in court seem to have been quite scathing of the president and the posture that the president had taken. And of course, we'll recap some of those arguments.
Yeah. Oliver, before I get to you, Prof, and I'll come to you in a moment, I promise I'll let you jump in. Oliver, I know that you watch these things very closely. In the course of the 2 days of argument, one argument stood out, and it had to do with the argument that said the president would suffer embarrassment if he was forced to appear before that committee and be taken through that process on the basis of what could turn out in the end to have been a flawed Section 89 independent panel report. But that was just one aspect, wasn't it? Given everything else, the elements that the president needed to prove if his urgent interdict application was to be successful.
It's important that we add the legal context to that argument, to us. The argument the president made around embarrassment was simply to say that members of parliament have the protection of parliamentary privilege. That is to say, any and everything they say against the president, however belligerent and scathing it might be, perhaps even defamatory, the president will have no legal recourse because they are protected by parliamentary privilege. The president can't take them to court on the basis of what they said in parliament. Members of parliament have that protection. So the president says that these people might just say things based on false premises, based on false information, and based on incomplete evidence, which is exactly the arguments that he's making against the Novo report, right? And so the president says, because I will have no recourse against anything that might be said against me, I might suffer irreparable harm. He says he almost certainly will suffer irreparable harm. But attached to that is a secondary argument, and that is that he says that this will, if he were to participate in this process, it would take him away from what he calls valuable presidential time. He will have to divert his attention to this instead of running the country, because, this might be time consuming and that might be damaging to the public. The response that the ATM gave to that argument in their replying affidavit was simply to say, well, if every president used that argument, then impeachment processes would never happen, because every president could say, well, this takes me away from running the country. That's simply not good enough.
Yeah, and I saw also the president, his legal counsel being taken almost, being challenged a little bit by the judges of that court to say a bit more about this idea of embarrassment, and saying that perhaps in the end, actually, the possibility is that the interests of South Africans trump any considerations around embarrassment, because South Africans have an interest in knowing whether or not there was wrongdoing on their number one citizen. Professor Sipho Seepe, let me bring you in then. We've seen the build-up as far as the legal side of things is concerned. We've seen the impeachment committee taking shape. What is at stake as we go into tomorrow with that coincidence that Oliver is talking to of the impeachment committee needing to move their processes forward around the terms of reference at the same time while the president is awaiting eagerly the outcome of his interdict application?
Well, it's important to also capture what the president says about the issue of embarrassment, that the privilege that members exercise, they exercise that privilege throughout the term of parliament. So it's not only right now. They can always say embarrassing things about the president anytime. So they'll still be protected. So that's a very weak argument. The second one is to understand that there's an issue of accountability. And we have a president who has projected himself as a person who's innocent and also Mr. Clean. And what you got from the Constitutional Court was a clear notion that says the president must be held to account. And the Constitution is very clear around that matter. And that the Constitutional Court really took a dim view that you can simply rough short and use your majority and then not make sure that there is a discussion around the report. And the truth is, the president does not want this report to be discussed, whether in the courts or whether in Parliament. And what he knows that with the committee, if it sits, which is already set, and that's also an argument that has been raised that should the president have wanted to stop the process, he should have done it before the Parliament has already started its work. So there's an issue of whether the court will want to intervene in that process because there are issues of encroachment. And there's a sense that the courts are very reluctant to try to dictate how Parliament should do its work. And in this case, there's a sense that the president might not get what he wants. But what is also clear, and his legal representative was very clear about this matter, that the matter not go in favor of the president is going to appeal. So, and that has been a concern from the courts that this matter would mean that the public will be held in suspense when the matter could actually be finalized. And there are people who are also saying, if the president is as innocent as he claims, why is he going through all these measures? Because as I say, the issue of humiliation, it's nonsensical because he can always be humiliated anytime. And this actually happens all the time whenever there's a debate in Parliament. So it is a very weak argument. And the second one is really the president had enough time to have reviewed this decision of findings, but he had relied on the majority that the ANC had, where it ran roughshod and say this is not going to be allowed. So the arguments that come from the president, politically, they're not convincing, and it appears like also legally they appear to be weak.
Yeah, so important though, Prof, to also place context to it that whole issue around embarrassment was part of the irreparable harm of the 4 requirements of an urgent interdict, the other being a prima facie right, the other one being the balance of convenience, and then also the whole issue of there are no other alternative available remedies should he suffer that harm. But that's not where I want to go with you. Where I want to go with you is what's happening in the committee itself. There's a question that arose, Prof, that I must say, sitting where I'm sitting as a layperson, I did not anticipate that whether or not the president testifies in person in Parliament would be an actual point of debate, but it seems it is, with parties such as the EFF, Action SA, ATM, and the MK party saying that he should, others saying that he shouldn't, and then you have the likes of the DA who are, neither here nor there, not interested really in that particular debate, well, at least according to the last sitting.
Well, I mean, it makes sense from those who do not want to support the president appearing in person. Remember, this is the president who has not taken direct questions even during interviews. He avoids that, and he might actually misspeak. And so he would rather put the answers. So I can understand that if you have a client who is not used to being cross-examined in that fashion, robustly, and the way he might actually say things, and we know that the president has said, has misspoken a number of times, like when he spoke and told members of the ANC that, oh, this money is money that comes from the proceeds of sale. And many lawyers have actually said by mere acknowledgement of that, and I think also that comes in the report, that the president was suggesting that he's also involved in having a side hustle. And if you have a side hustle and you're a president, then that could be a side hustle where you earn money. That would fall foul of the Constitution. And the report and the panel was very clear around those issues, that the president may have violated. There's a prima facie evidence that he may have violated the Constitution and also anti-corruption laws. So you would understand that appearing before the committee, which will be led by somebody who's a legal eagle, the president might find himself in a corner. And so it might be better for him to say, I do not want to appear, I'd rather respond in terms of writing. And
Oliver, I love how attuned you are to these legal matters, as I pick up on the point that Prof Seepe is making and using that famous expression, prima facie. At some point during the arguments, it came down to that. What was the test for the independent panel report? Was it about establishing prima facie a case, or was it about sufficient evidence? And we've heard those arguments being advanced, but also all the other arguments that we heard during the 2 days of the hearing, as well as the whole question about when the Constitutional Court delivered its judgment, did it leave the door open for a review of the independent panel report by a high court as opposed to directly to the Constitutional Court? All of these are quite fascinating. Where do you believe the key narratives of the judgment, the ratio, is likely to come from? I'm not asking you to deliver the judgment, but your own expectations of where should we be looking for the answers to this legal question?
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to litigate that case right here on the doorsteps of Parliament. But I do want to add this piece of context to that, because I think it's an important part of the consideration. The Nobel panel had said so long ago that it perhaps escaped our memories what exactly happened at the time, and I think that's important for consideration. They said for 30 days. That was the time frame that was given to them by the Speaker of the National Assembly to be able to produce this report. Important and concomitant to that is the fact that they had very limited powers, right? That is to say, they weren't able to call witnesses, they weren't able to apply forensics tests to evidence, and the argument that's being made by the respondents in this matter is that given the limited power and resources that the Nobel panel had, that of course they were going to consider what the president calls information to be evidence, because they had no alternative means. They did, however, in some parts of the Fraser allegations, tested those claims that was made by Fraser independently, however limited that may have been. And so the respondents then make the argument in this matter that sufficient evidence as well as prima facie evidence can and should rightfully so be then conflated to the same standard. Of course, the court will have to decide on whether or not that is the correct application thereof. But of course, that is not a matter for the interim interdict consideration, right? That is a matter for the review consideration, which is sitting early September next month. I do want to perhaps also just to one of the points that Prof Sipho Seepe was making there with regards to, the procedural parts of how this committee will be considering. One of the arguments that the respondents made, particularly around the idea that the president says that he will be embarrassed, one of the arguments that is made by the respondents is that the president has no real means to actually rely on that argument or even make that assumption or infer that, given that he will be protected by the rules of the committee. Of course, the committee rules being born out of the parliamentary rules, and it's a relationship between those two. And I guess importantly here is that there is a consideration and a debate within the committee members on whether or not the president should appear before. One of the issues that Prof Seepe says that the president might not want to answer was whether or not he had a side hustle. We know that the Public Protector report tested that question under the Executive Ethics Code consideration in her report, and she said that the president drew no profits from the Phala Phala farm operation. Therefore, the president was not engaged in private work or a side hustle. as Prof Siepe may have put it there. And that was one of the considerations. And I think that obviously is going to play itself out in the impeachment hearings itself. The ANC, interestingly to us, has brought this forward this idea that there must be a two-pronged approach in the committee's work. The first being that the committee must take a consideration of all other reports related to this, the South African Reserve Bank report, the SARS report, the Public Protector report, before it begins to engage independently in its own evidence collection.
Right. Wow. Okay, that would be interesting. I wonder how that will go down with the rest of the committee. I've got to leave it there. Thank you for this time. That is SABC News anchor Oliver Dickson, live for us from Cape Town, where the legal gladiators have laid it all in the field, in the arena, and now await the outcome from the judges, as well as political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe fusing in there a bit of political analysis and insights into the politics behind what is at this point a legal story.